Yep.
Called over to the City Council work session for City of East Grand Forks for Tuesday, February 8th, 2022. City Clerk, please call roll.
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olsted.
Here.
Council Vice President Tim Riepel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Dale Helms. Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Present.
Brian Larson.
Here. Does the term quorum. Number 1, discussion of utilities and street reconstruction for 5th Avenue and 20th Street Northwest. Mr. Murphy.
Okay, thank you. I guess not probably looking at any maybe real action on this yet for the next meeting, but more of a kind of bringing it up to your attention, kind of where we're at. I will apologize. I was aware of the provision for council-initiated projects like this that required a supermajority. I guess I was aware of that position, that condition. However, it just didn't occur to me. It's not something that typically comes up. So with that, when it's council initiated, in order to move forward with the project, it requires a supermajority, the 4/5 vote. So with that, the vote was 4 ayes, 3 nays. So even though it passed at a majority, it did not pass because it was not a supermajority. So with that being said, I know the engineer had started doing the putting together the plans and specs. So we did speak about that a little bit earlier. Most of what they've, I think pretty much all of what you've done, it probably has a shelf life of at least a few years anyway, coming up with that. So with that being said, we won't have it at the next council meeting or anything because it did fail. So with that, just any feedback from the council or if any direction you might want to have for us to do that. But so just want to make you aware of that.
One question for rules, I guess, can the prevailing side bring it back though?
Well, actually, since it failed because it was a 4-3 vote, even though that was the minority,
So
one of the three would have to bring it
right.
up. Yep.
That's what I meant.
Correct. Yep.
Prevailing.
Yep. That is true. Yep. One of them could bring it back for reconsideration.
Mayor?
Yeah, I think we should come up with a new course of action, whatever that may be, to leave it with that as a conclusion of no action, I think would be probably an error on our part. So we should figure out what our next step is, either maybe to bring it back for reconsideration or some alternative beyond that. Thanks.
Mr. Emery?
So I guess when Megan and David initially caught this is I had completed an RCA, to bring this forward to the work session tonight, and then, getting final approval at next week's council meeting, basically to file plans and specs and getting a bid date set. David is correct. Here's the plan set. We got it 95% complete. And again, like David said, I mean, at this point, you put it on the shelf for 3 to 5 years, it's still going to be good. I mean, there's nothing in there that, for any reason wouldn't be good. So, I guess my thought is, if I put it on the shelf today for a year or two, to come back to it's going to be tough. So, I mean, I'm in a position where, I basically want to finish the plans this week, have them 100% complete, and then, whatever the council decides, we'll just pull it off the shelf at that time. But it, is pretty much ready to go to bid.
So the question goes to the people that voted nay on it. Would one of them, does it just have to be one of them, or does it have to be 2 of them, actually?
No, just one. All it takes is one to make a motion to reconsider. Anybody, all the rest of the council could second it.
Okay. So I guess the question goes back to them if they want to bring it back around and have a discussion, or just not.
Yeah, but as far as a motion to reconsider, that would, I mean, we could talk about that, whether they want to do it now, but that would need to be done at the next
Right.
full council meeting. Yep.
Yep.
Do we need to have, sorry, go ahead.
I just have one question. As part of this conversation, we had also talked about potentially a project of a more limited scope that we think, potentially lines up with what the neighbors would be interested in paying for. Is there a scenario here where, that scope gets put together and designed if there's interest, and then we would simply bid these two together, option A and an option B? That way your effort isn't wasted.
Well, I mean, right at this point, I mean, the direction we were kind of given that night after the council meeting is we're going to proceed with plans and specs and the concrete street option. So that's what these plans include. So, not to say that you couldn't do a more limited option, but, I think the thought is let's get pricing, see where they come in at. Hopefully we get a bid early, we get good prices, and, things can move forward, but.
Mr. Demers?
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we need to have a resolution at the next work session that allows for them to get paid?
Because normally it would be part of the project, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we proceeded, with the understanding that everything passed. No one realized this little, I guess, hiccup until just this week. So, we've did all the topo work. We've put basically put the plans together, so we've put the work necessary forth and.
Yeah. Well, it would need to be approved through the check register. Typically on these types of projects, we even when other ones that we've gone where they haven't all the way gone through to fruition, we approve the payment of it. That payment gets charged to that particular project line item. And then to be reimbursed at some point, either through special assessments, bonding, those types of things. If the project does not go through to fruition, we take, it comes out of the engineering budget. So, but what I was planning on doing was treating it that same way. It was just putting it on the check register.
But we haven't approved anything at the council level, so
No.
we should probably have a resolution that says that we at least allow them.
I think that, I guess I don't disagree with that. It would make a better paper trail, so I guess I'm fine with that.
But the alternative to that would be if one of those who voted no wanted to bring it back. Then
Yeah,
it
but
goes
you'd have to have
forward.
2 people vote for it. You could have one person want to bring it back, but you'd have to have 2 people vote for it. Because it's a
Well-
supermajority is 6 aye votes, right?
Correct. And we got, how many did you have that night?
There's 3 days.
vote.
4-3, okay. So 2 would have to swing.
Right. Mr. Johnson?
Nothing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will do that.
Anything else?
No, I think I have what I need.
Okay. Number 2, discussion on future bridges. Mr. Vetter?
Thank you, Mr. President. Metropolitan Planning Organization had a study, but an ad hoc committee had a number of citizens on there. They weren't all elected officials. There were some elected officials. The goal of the committee was to look at Elks Drive and 32nd Avenue as a possible site for a bridge, and it's to look at traffic pattern safety, a number of issues. They weren't ever supposed to come out with a recommendation. It was just to look at the information for the citizens to take it back to their citizen groups, elected officials to bring it back to their elected official groups. When we looked at the data, overwhelmingly 32nd again rose to the top as a better site. Again, there's no recommendation from that committee, but when you look at the data, 32nd is a better option than Elks Drive. And we had some discussion at MPO, what's our next step? A gentleman from the Grand Forks side of the river made the comment that we need to get a shovel-ready project going because there's going to be all kinds of federal money, and what process do we need to do to get that shovel-ready project going? And we were both cities, representatives from the cities, were going to take it back to their councils, respective councils, to have a discussion on what kind of process we want to go on moving forward. MPO is going to invite North Dakota DOT and Minnesota DOT to their meeting next month to have a discussion on bridges also. So I'm just opening it up on what kind of discussion do we want to have here in moving a bridge forward.
Are you talking the dual 2 bridges?
The Merrifield isn't within our jurisdiction, so
Right,
we
I
really
understand
don't
that.
have any control over that one and can't discuss that one, I guess. So we're looking at an intercity bridge.
So are they bringing it back to the MPO TAC meeting? Is that where they're bringing it back, Clarence?
The DOTs are being invited to the admin meeting.
Executive.
Okay.
Executive.
Okay.
Mayor, sorry.
So real quick, I know we all have an idea what it means that 32nd was identified as a preferred corridor. Would you please take us back through how it achieves traffic objectives, probably some cost objectives, maybe flood mitigation? Just kind of wind back through, just for all of our conversation, how 32nd appears to be, by good statistical analysis, a preferred corridor.
I've got a few. Mr. Larson was on the committee, and I would ask for him to speak to those topics, and I can throw my 4 cents in afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could go first, and I don't have all the technical data in front of me here, but I could certainly prepare that in a kind of a concise email with some bullet points. But when you compare the two bridge locations, cost is not wildly different between the two. Neither really is the flood protection. It's the impacts on where the bridge lands, particularly on the Grand Forks side, that causes the major differences. The 32nd Avenue Bridge location does improve traffic flow at a number of intersections, as it doesn't create a bunch of turning movements up and down Belmont or potentially through Grand Forks streets like 24th, which does have some public schools. So it's a much more efficient and kind of a common sense corridor right through 32nd. Access to the interstate, big box shopping, things of that nature is off of 32nd. It also really helps to alleviate quite a bit of traffic up and down the South Washington corridor. The issues that are being solved with this bridge are primarily on the Grand Forks side. We have traffic problems in two intersections, Bigland and Reinhardt, Bigland and 13th. And those traffic issues and service levels at those intersections are both somewhat addressed by either bridge location. But when you look over at the Grand Forks side and you start to compare how we're improving the level of service and intersections on that side of the bridge by getting rid of all these turning movements with that Elks Bridge location that then puts cars back on Belmont, where there's close access to Viking Elementary, then up around 32nd, it really helps to take cars off of South Washington, which is really the pinch point. So South Washington and Demers is one of the worst intersections in the entire state. And I think everyone knows that. And there's no room to grow South Washington out. There's no room for lanes. So it's really, really kind of squashed, and it's overloaded now. So adding this bridge alleviates some of that stress on that corridor, and pushing that bridge south helps to give South Washington more breathing room down to 32nd. Some of the pushback that we had was primarily from the neighborhood at 32nd and Belmont, as you would expect. That bridge is coming right into people's backyards. No way around it. There is more houses right at the Belmont and 32nd neighborhood than there is at Elks and Belmont. But by bringing that bridge on Elks and Belmont, you're bringing all those cars right up and down Belmont Road, which we all know is very densely developed as residential. And that's kind of where we left it. As Clarence summed it up very well. The ad hoc committee by design did not select option A or option B. But we looked at all the data, we looked at the level of service, we also looked at the community financial impact. I think I'm quoting that right, but the overall economic impact of the bridge, improving transportation of goods and services across state lines. There's a way to put like a dollar figure to that, and I couldn't tell you that formula, but the 32nd Avenue Bridge showed a higher return on investment, where the bridge essentially paid for itself due to the overall impact to the economy. The Elks Bridge did not. It was just perceived as being not convenient enough to actually be used to really help grow the community. Hopefully that sums up some of it.
Do you go with the high and dry or the wet bridge?
Medium.
Medium.
Mr. Larson's last point refers to the cost of benefit ratios. And when you're looking at federal dollars, federal wants a cost benefit ratio above 1. 32nd Avenue Bridge gives that to us. The Elks Elks Bridge, I believe, is under a .1 or under a 1 point. So more benefits with the 32nd compared to costs.
I have one question on the 32nd, and remind me, with our side of the river, does that come out on 190th? Or is it?
Is 190 the county road right outside of the,
Yeah.
They come out at the same area.
curves in?
It drives in to the.
To the dike?
Inside our flood protection, yeah.
Mainly because if you go onto that 190th,
It's in the county.
then it's a county bridge.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. And really, when I look at it, I mean, they got 32nd curves in and comes in across the dike. Elks comes in and curves in just a little bit farther north of that. And really, whichever one you went with, I would suggest they both come in at the same area. Elks and 32nd come in at the same area, just because it makes more sense when you look long-term where it's going across farther out towards Bigland and hooking up that way.
I think that's how I've seen it too, is both of those can land on the Minnesota side at roughly the same location. It's all a matter of what happens once it heads west.
Mr. Demers, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, they both kind of have to go there, primarily for like flood impact because of when we did our water, our hydrology study, if you put it further south, you have more impact to homes and all that kind of stuff. If you bring it up inside the levee, it mitigates that somewhat. I have two things I want to talk about. Number one, speaking a little bit further, or hopefully engaging in more discussion with what Mr. Vetter was talking about, is really getting to that point of moving from plan to action. How do you, the MPO doesn't really have the ability to do anything. We've basically become the conduit for funding, conduit for these type of programs. But what we need is city buy-in for both sides to be able to move forward and get to that, like Mr. Vetter said, that shovel-ready type project. And really what that comes out back to is for both cities, and first we have to decide if we have priorities or whatever, and Grand Forks to decide how they want to proceed, but really deciding who becomes the lead agencies. Is it better to have North Dakota DOT, Minnesota DOT because of funding or because of environmental regulations or whatever? And that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to bring the DOTs in to discuss. But we'll have to make a decision on how we want to proceed with that. Secondarily, really comes down to funding and how much money do we want to start putting into this, and that may dovetail into our next discussion, or two discussions now, or whatever, our legislative priority discussion. How do we want to address it? I think one of the first things that we're going to have to do is the NEPA study, the environmental impact studies. It's going to be expensive. We'll have to decide on scope. How big of an area do we want to do it? Who's going to pay for it? How much? All those type of things. Are we going to request bonding money? Are we going to request DOT money, federal dollars, any of those type of things? There's certain restrictions. Minnesota doesn't allow federal dollars to go towards planning and engineering, whereas North Dakota allows for those type of things. So it might be better for North Dakota DOT, but like I said, we might be eligible for bonding dollars to try to get to this. So maybe it becomes a Minnesota DOT. But one of the things that I think we need to do is kind of authorize our city administrator to start meeting with Grand Forks City Administrator to kind of work through the administrative process of this and start coordinating those things. Like I said, and Mr. Vetter said, is, we're going to start bringing in the agencies and start talking about what the best path forward is. But again, the big thing is how many dollars do we want to spend and to get this thing moving? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I guess I don't think I'm breaking any confidence here. My counterpart across the river and I have already informally discussed this. We did get from the engineering what the timelines for the different processes and where we don't have costs here at this point. So we have had some informal discussions about the steps, kind of which side maybe would be more appropriate for leading each, or being the point agency for each one. But the funding will be the big one when it's time to start engaging consultants to do the environmental impact, those types of things. But so I will say that discussion has started, and I think it's looking pretty promising.
Right, and going on, as we discuss our priorities, maybe we should try to come up with some ballpark dollars that we can bring up to the legislature when we're down there, if that is part of what our goals end up being. We can talk about that in the next round. Yeah. Second item is, the acreage in that area is now up for auction. It will be up on March 2nd. I believe that we should, at our next available time, come up with or have a closed door session and discuss strategy for potentially purchasing that land. I guarantee you that if we buy it at auction, it's going to be less money down the road if someone else buys it and decides they want to develop it outside of just farming it or whatever. So I think it would be, I believe that that auction is March 2nd through the 9th. So like I said, I don't think we should discuss it too much further here, but
I'll start working with legal on that.
Yeah, and just maybe have a closed door session to see what kind of things are options. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Do you guys need anything else, or just bringing us up to speed?
Unless we want to commit some dollars, have a resolution next week that says we're going to commit X dollars to a NEPA study or environmental studies, and
I'll see if I can get a ballpark prior to that, and see if I can have it ready for the next meeting.
okay.
And would we attempt to share that cost across the river?
That would be my hope.
So that would be a coordination also with your counterpart over there to.
We have had some discussion that, like Mr. DeBerge said, who's going to be the lead agency? Do you want to be East Grand Forks or Grand Forks? There's some discussion that if it's East Grand Forks, is it going to look like we're cramming it down Grand Forks' throat, so maybe we don't want to be the lead? I would propose that we have another subcommittee of a couple from Grand Forks, a couple from East Grand Forks that sits on a committee to look at bids and approve bids and move forward from that standpoint, so it's a collaborative effort, not just one side versus the other side. You're still going to have a lead agency from the federal standpoint, but I think from the local level, we should be able to work together, a couple from each side, and get this thing done.
Don't we already have one?
A subcommittee for that?
Yeah.
No, not really a formal one, no.
You could use the public works. Is there a group that needs kind of
We should consider how the committee with the chamber could serve in this regard. I mean, they're meeting at some interval and helping to push this thing forward also. So there's some pretty good momentum right there. And I think they have a good approach. It's going to be a coordinated effort, actually lobbying to the county, to the state, to the Fed, between the two sides.
I mean, that's where I was leaning, because, we already have that committee set up where we actually have the state legislators there also, so there's more involvement.
If they want to expand their focus, sure.
Boy, they're all about the bridges right now.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to make a note of that.
Just so we get our.
It's this Thursday.
The last time I was there, they were more pushing for a Merrifield Bridge and weren't looking at an intercity bridge, so I don't know whether that's the right group to handle this.
This is a smaller group now that's continued on out of that. there may be an opportunity there.
I'd keep my eyes open. I don't know, I necessarily agree with that just yet.
And I think whatever we do, we're going to have to keep the momentum moving forward out of this room right here.
Correct.
Okay, anybody else have anything? All righty, move on. Number 3, review of legislative day topics. Mr. Murphy, looks like we got 3 written down there that you maybe thought we would
Yep.
highlight it and.
Yeah, and yeah, so, because we're having the legislative day will be March 2nd down at the state capitol, and in the past, we've come up with kind of our main topics that we're going to talk about. What we've learned is typically the fewer the better, to try to focus on just a few of them. So right now, the 3 big ones that we have are the citywide sales tax for the public facilities, our perennial local government aid, and then bonding for the interconnect bridge between East Grand Forks and Grand Forks, North Dakota. My recommendation, that would be the 3 we'd really focus on, do our background and meet with or get our presentations together and meet with the committees that would be helpful for that. But I just wanted to put this out here to see if there's anything out there, any other ones that maybe would be pressing that I'm missing, but those were the 3 that we had focused on.
I know the coalition was part of it. Didn't they have public hearings on the LGA looking at it this last week here?
They're working on new formulas
Right.
and new.
Don't forget our police department. The Minnesota's they want more money to get down on this crime, so could be a little bit in there for us.
Okay.
Mr. Demers?
2 things that I've thought about that we should, and I agree with, I'll start out by saying I agree with Mr. Murphy, is we don't want to have a 20-item list of things that we want to do. We have limited time in front of certain people. But I think if we have an idea of what we want to talk about, that may target who, we have Megan contact to get in front of. The 2 things that I would open for discussion that we should talk about is, number 1, there is some talk about licensing centers, and that there's some plans out there right now to go backwards from where, we went through the COVID stuff and it restricted a lot of the centers to a few hubs around the state. Now they've kind of finally opened them up in January, and then now as they did that, they had a study that is now kind of is suggesting that we pull back to like 40 instead of the 90 or whatever that are out there right now. And East Grand Forks would not be in that. Well, it isn't a suggested site, nor is Crookston. I think the nearest is Thief River, Bemidji, Moorhead, I think, are around here. But I think it would be to our benefit to at least mention that we would not be in favor. Well, I am not in favor of shrinking that number. I don't know. Like I said, I'd be open for discussion if that's something we would want to pursue. I think it is important. We're in competition with Grand Forks. It's a lot easier if you're in Grand Forks. You just drive down the road and change licenses. It's not just, the 16-year-old kid, which takes the parent that has to take a full day off of work to go to Bemidji to do all these things, but it's also, farmers and businesses that use trucking and all those type of things that it makes a big difference for. And then the second thing is, we had kind of talked about it, and I don't know what the exact framing would be, but we talked about it a little bit with the city attorneys, and about how, we're spending a lot more money in these out years now I'm calling it out years from COVID, but in backlog time and all these things, and wondering if there isn't something that can be done from the state level to, remunerate for the increased cost to cities for, city attorney fees and those type of things. So those are just my 2 cents.
Question for you, Mark. Is the coalition bringing up the licensing centers at all?
They have addressed it as an issue,
So
but
is there going to be a request for like a resolution backing that?
I haven't seen anything yet. I think it's just still, it's fairly new. It's only a couple weeks that they've kind of come out with that recommendation. And I think there's already some pushback. I think the biggest thing for us is maybe right now is just making sure that our legislators are aware of it. And I would imagine with ours, they probably are aware of that already, but just making sure that they know that that's out there and that.
Maybe if the coalition does ask for something or maybe a resolution, maybe make sure we know about it so we can get it on.
Sure thing.
Anybody else have anything? Mr. Larson?
Yeah, we had talked a little bit about the potential for bonding for infrastructure investment to help offset some of the costs with the Parks and Rec project. Would we see that as a separate topic here, or would it get buried into one of these conversations?
That's a good point. It may be some slightly different legislators, one more toward tax and one more toward bonding. So it would make some sense, I think, to maybe parse that out.
Yeah. Reed's team has done a really good job of kind of uncoupling the infrastructure costs from this overall program. So I think we can present a surprisingly large dollar of infrastructure needs that bonding would be a great solution for.
And I think if we go down there, we should have a pretty good handle of what that is, and we should discuss it with our reps before we start shopping it around to other, say, the capital investment chair or the.
We did run it up the flagpole with both Representative Keel and Senator Johnson, and they actually kind of guided us through that process of pulling out that infrastructure part and then submitting it separately. But for sure, as we approach that moment, as to who we talk to and what the exact message ought to be, they can guide us a lot, for sure.
Anybody else have any items?
Well, who's going down there?
So far, for elected officials, it's the mayor, Council President Olstad, Brian Larson, and Mark Demers.
And Reed and Mr. Murphy are going.
Well, that's a good representation. Good luck to you guys. I'll tell you what, I appreciate it.
Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? No, we'll move on to the next item.
All right.
Will we have, is that something that we need to vote on, or is that just we're going to?
No, I don't think we have to take from. I think just we can take direction from that.
Okay.
Number 4, set date and time for a strategic plan review. Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, again, I like I said, I don't learn my lesson. I try to call and try to put a date or time together by talking to individual council members and things like that. And I should know better by now. So what's been the most successful is when everybody's in the room here for us to pull out our calendars and see what day and time would work best.
So you ignore you? Is that what you
Yeah. So historically, we've done it on a Saturday. Depending on how long we want to I think it's something we could do in an evening if we were willing to go a little bit later, say start at 5:30, and go to say at least probably maybe 9:30 or something. We could probably get it done in an evening. Otherwise, a Saturday would probably be beneficial if we don't really want to stay that late. So with that being said, any preference on weeknight or Saturday? Let's start with that.
Saturdays are a little difficult for some of us with children and weekend basketball tournaments, things of that nature. It's that season. I know Mark is in the same thing with me. So there is some challenges there, just to be open about it.
So my other thought process with that being said was maybe try to take a work session night and maybe not have a work session agenda item on that and use that instead.
I'll do that. I'd stay till midnight if you have to.
Sounds great.
Yeah, that would work. I like that.
Okay, so we got,
Or even if you had to have a short, I mean, you could have a 1 or 2 item work session if you had to.
so yeah, and work sessions are the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. So,
Back in March,
March 8th will be the first one available, I think.
8th or the 22nd.
March 8th, you said?
8th or 22nd. Yep,
Yeah, that would work for me.
March 8th.
We'd be coming right off of the, we'd be at the,
Get out of the cities and that?
yeah. Yeah, so that'll still be fresh on our mind too, that might help, you know, from what we had down there, so that maybe the 8th wouldn't be a bad time. Does that work? Okay, I'll put that down.
Where would you have it at, David?
I like to have it off-site. Maybe we'll try to, I'll see if we can use either the senior center, or we've used the,
Let's see.
yeah, the Water and Light Building, why am I'm blanking on the name of it? The Distribution Center over there. Because what we found is it's a little bit, when we're in these, either, you know, in a setting here, even at the training room, it still kind of has that mindset of a council meeting. When we were off-site, I think we get a little bit better participation and a little bit more openness.
Yeah. You know, if it's appropriate, it could be interesting to look at, you know, helping going to a local establishment, you know, renting a room at a restaurant or bar and doing something there. That's a very more casual vibe. Might help the conversation flow somewhat.
Well, there are cities that do them in those places.
If appropriate, you know.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's not unheard of. There are cities that do their strategic plannings in those types of places, so. What is the thought on that?
I'm down for, too bad we don't have a riverboat anymore.
Yeah, we can't, you know, obviously, alcohol is off limits, but everything else is okay.
Back to the senior center then.
Meeting's over, we can have
Right back to the senior center.
Afterwards you can, but not. Right, there you have it. I'll see if I can find it.
And motion to adjourn. Moved by Johnson,
Second.
second by Riepel. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried, meeting is adjourned.
I
started off on that beer.
okay.
All together and then be there at a